Thanks to all of you for being with us this morning. Really excited to have you tuning in to the latest segment in our ongoing series of Friday morning conversations as we highlight innovative education leaders, cutting edge education ideas, really from all across Tennessee and across the nation. And in the spirit of SCORE's commitment and our mission that we seek to catalyze innovative change in education, and in our core values as an organization, that many of the most difficult challenges in education can be solved through creative and innovative solutions, we want to seek to highlight innovators, entrepreneurs, leaders from across our state who are leading the way for students. And so our goal each Friday is to pick a single topic and to do a deep dive to quickly learn more about that topic, hear from leaders who are driving forward work on that idea, and hopefully to trigger some thoughts or ideas that you can take away and apply in your own daily work. I know folks are busy, so our goal is to keep these sessions both brief and informal, but I will say that we'll be taking questions really in the second half of the conversation today. So please feel free to add into the Q&A section at any time as we go, and I'll be sure to surface questions for Sam and for Troy as we go through the conversation. So this morning, I'm very excited to welcome Samantha Gutter and Troy Grant from the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, or THEC. And THEC recently announced the launch of a momentum building year in 2023 to renew and articulate the value of education in Tennessee and boost enrollment in education beyond high school. With Tennessee's college going rate trending downward over the past few years, SCORE is joining and working together with THEC and several other partners to inform and engage more students with the many educational and job training opportunities they have after high school. I know folks are going to want to learn a lot more, so I'm going to quickly introduce Sam and Troy, and then we'll get right to it. Samantha Gutter serves as the Chief Access and Outreach Officer at THEC and oversees the Access and Outreach Bureau, including adult learner initiatives, college access and success programs, and statewide outreach services. Sam previously served as Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Post-Secondary Impact here at SCORE, and we're so pleased to continue to partner with Sam on this important work. Troy Grant is the Senior Director of College Access at THEC, where he helps to create and implement resources, supports, and initiatives to increase the number of Tennesseans who enroll and succeed in higher education. Troy has led and played a key role in a number of THEC's major college access initiatives, including Gear Up, Advise TM, the Tennessee FAFSA Challenge, and more. So please join me in welcoming Samantha and Troy today. Sam and Troy, why don't you all start by sharing an overview of the important work you're doing, overview of the momentum year work, and then we'll turn to some questions. And I'll just say, again, a reminder, as you have questions throughout the conversation, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, and we'll be sure to get to those as we go through the conversation. So Sam and Troy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. And it's an honor and a joy to be here this morning. The Tennessee Higher Education Commission is relentlessly focused on increasing the number of Tennesseans with a post-secondary degree or credential, knowing that that can lead to a choice-filled life of agency. And so we pursue this goal by innovating for student access and success, creating a policy environment conducive to increased degree attainment, and protecting students and consumers. And our team at THEC, at the agency, we build strategic partnerships and do direct service programs to build capacity and coordinate and collaborate with partners across the state to better serve students. And so that's really in the spirit of what we were doing with this momentum year. So we're excited to share with you all today. So we, back in May, THEC published the first ever college going report. Our team began by first releasing the college going rate report and jump-started into a stakeholder engagement process to get input from the public on where we should go next, knowing that the college going rate and college enrollment overall has declined. And there's an overall question and reimagining and understanding of the value of education in our state and in our country at this time. So through our stakeholder engagement process, from there, we have now launched into a state level vision and strategy. And so, but first, we're going to start by sharing and setting the context for the college going rate data to understand the baseline of where we are with college enrollment in our state currently. So the college going rate, to begin, is a measure of the proportion of graduates in each public high school cohort that seamlessly enroll in post-secondary education in the summer or fall following high school graduation. So when we say class of 2021, we mean public high school students who graduated in the 2021 school year who enrolled in college in the summer or fall of 2021. This begins with data on public high school graduates provided by the Tennessee Department of Education through the state's longitudinal data system. This data is where we get demographic information on students, namely race, gender, and county. And these data are then matched into the Tennessee Higher Education Commission Student Information System, which contains enrollment data from our public institutions. We collect enrollment each term at the end of term, and so I share this to show what is included in the data. So this includes Tennessee public community colleges, Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, our four-year public universities, and the University of Tennessee system. And then we also use the National Student Clearinghouse's student tracker to match graduates for college enrollment out of state at public and private institutions as well. So finally, once the data are matched, we can then calculate the college going rate. We'll have a list of all students counted by the Tennessee Department of Education in the public high school graduating cohort. And we'll have an indicator of whether that student was found enrolled in post-secondary education at a Tennessee public institution or, again, at a private or out-of-state institution. The college going rate is then simply the college goers divided by the total number of high school graduates. And I share this to show what we are talking about when we say the college going rate. And so now that you know what the college going rate is, here's the headline that we have mentioned and that we at our agency have really put out there into the world and have talked about. The college going rate for the class of 2021 dropped to 52.8%. And so this is a 9 percentage point drop since the onset of the pandemic. And as you can see, this graph of the statewide college going rate for the previous decade, declines in college going rate over the last 2 years have lowered to where we stood prior to the implementation of Tennessee Promise in 2015. So I'll let this decline, this number sink in for a moment. We're currently at 52.8% college going, and this has implications for longer term outcomes for students going into the pipeline, knowing that college completion is important for a life of success and outcomes and having a choice-filled life of agency for students. So we start with this pipeline, knowing that we really focus on attainment and completion, but the pipeline and who's getting access really matters as we start these discussions of higher education opportunity for students. And with that, here we see the college going rate for the previous 3 cohorts, shown by 3 of the racial demographic groups that we capture in our reporting. The groups shown here are not inclusive of all student groups, but do capture the largest groups by race, and more detail is available in our reporting and data downloads. We see that the decline in the college going rate for white students mirrors the college going rate decline overall. See where the gray line at the top runs roughly parallel to the dashed overall line. And however, the college going rate for Black or African American students shown in the navy blue line decreased to a greater degree than for white students, especially for the class of 2020, and then ultimately dropping to 44% for the class of 2021. And then Hispanic or Latino students' college going rate is shown in light blue at the bottom, with a 35% college going rate for the class of 2021. And notably, this demographic group is one that is growing in our high school graduate cohorts over the last 5 years in particular of graduating classes. An increasing proportion of students have been Hispanic or Latino. And these gaps existed prior to the onset of the pandemic, but only increased and widened. And so this is a real call to action for how we need to address strategies and innovate going forward. We need to make sure that we're keeping different student groups in mind, particularly for racial equity. Here we see the college going rates by gender. Males shown on the right side for all 3 recent cohorts had a lower college going rate than for females, even before recent declines. Male college going rate dropped more between 2019 and 2020 than female college going, but female college going dropped more for the class of 2021, knowing that we saw a larger overall decline there. However, male college going rate remains well below the female college going rate, falling below 50% for the last two cohorts. And when you match the gender and race pairs, these data are very staggering for our male students in particular, and Black males and Hispanic males in particular as well.
So when you look at the state as a whole, you'll see across this map that the distribution of what college going looks like across the state looks very different geographically depending on where you are in the state. So you'll notice there in the middle, that's Williamson County at 81%. Right there to the left, 76, 75. Those are two counties that are served by the Ayers Foundation, Decatur and Perry. Lake County. We'll talk a little bit more about what we might see happening in some of those communities. But when you look at the state, really it is uneven. There are disparities that we are seeing as it relates to what this data looks like. And this is for the class of 2021. Sam, if you could go to the next slide. I think this slide will really show you what has changed over the last 5 years. You'll see the darker the blue, the larger the increase, and the closer you get to white is the larger the decrease in college going from the class of 2017 to the class of 2021. There are 7 counties that increased their college going rate during this time period. 6 of those 7 had some kind of college access program that was operating via the Ayers Foundation, Garrett, Tennessee, Niswonger, Advise Tennessee, that are offering full-time advising services to students. That's where we've seen some growth. But as you can see, the impact of the pandemic and just this last 5-year time period has been significant in some of these communities.
So we know that college going and that seamless enrollment from high school has decreased during the pandemic. Also wanted to share the overall proportion of adults enrolling in higher education. And we know that enrollment overall, particularly for community colleges, declined, but thinking about the overall proportion of adults who are enrolling, so not those students that are going straight from high school, has declined slightly since the onset of the pandemic. And you can see here that the overall number, the percentage doesn't seem to change as much, but this represents roughly 7,500 less adults since 2018 have enrolled. And you can see there was a jump from 2017 to 2018. That was the implementation of Tennessee Promise in our state. So the opportunity for adults to return to post-secondary or go enroll for the first time, tuition free at our community or technical colleges. So we saw a jump in adult enrollment, and it has somewhat leveled off since then. So we want to make sure that we, as the world changes, as the economy will continue to require post-secondary education, want to continue focusing on all students, not just students that enroll straight from high school. And I should share that the number on the top is community colleges, and then the gray line is all public institutions in the state. So now, without further ado, wanting to share how we have launched a state level vision and strategy. THEC announced the launch of a momentum building year to renew and articulate the value of education in Tennessee, to increase enrollment and drive enrollment in education and training beyond high school. So based on feedback from state and local leaders based on feedback from state and local leaders and through different community groups, we have embarked on this process. So since May, THEC has had a public feedback page available on our website, where we've gotten really excellent input on where we need to go next as a state. And really what we learned from that is that there's a lot of different answers and we all need to work together. And so we have had different presentations where we've shared the data and really spotlighted, held up a magnifying glass to the data and the declines that we've seen in college going and college enrollment, and engaged with diverse audiences, both in Tennessee and nationally. And what we've heard is that this is not specific to Tennessee. This is happening everywhere. This plays out in the data and in conversations about how folks are thinking about addressing this challenge. We and we have also shared local reports and data, particularly broken down by high schools, with our local school districts. And we're hoping to share more county level information so that communities across the state can really engage and address this issue head on along with us, because that is how we are choosing to address these challenges. So we, as I mentioned, have launched a momentum building year. And so really what this looks like is using this next year to figure out where we need to go next, to use this time of learning to build and share the value of education and driving momentum, building momentum to drive enrollment in education and training beyond high school. And so again, what we heard is that there's no one answer to solving this just challenge, and we've got to ensure that students see multiple opportunities available to them. And so we want to use this next year to really put a bookend on what is it that we need to be focusing on as a state going forward. How do we get this in a way that adapts to the future, and how can we innovate together to better solve these problems in the future for students and their families and Tennesseans overall. So we have some big goals for the momentum year that will help us reach this time of building momentum. So the first is to increase the college going rate for the high school class of 2023 to at least 60%. We're specifically targeting this year's high school seniors, so students that are currently in a high school building right now and making critical decisions for their future. We know that the class of 2023 has had a challenging high school experience. Their freshman year was the first year of the pandemic, and they're resilient and have faced so many challenges in their lives already. And we're only beginning to see some of the repercussions and the impact of this time period on our students and on adults as well. And particularly for low-income students and students of color, they've been disproportionately impacted during this time period. So all efforts to reach this overall North Star of 60% should include strategies to support students who've been traditionally underserved by education. So we have this overall goal of 60%, but through this, we're hoping to launch strategies that will target students who have been underserved. The second goal is to increase adult enrollment in higher education through the Tennessee Reconnect participation. So as you saw, we've seen some leveling off of adult enrollment. At the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, we have a program called Navigate Reconnect, where we have navigators across the state who are working with adults from the time that they are thinking about going back to higher education. They fill out an intake form, and we go through the process and our navigators go through the process with them about making decisions to potentially go back. And we're seeing an uptick in adults who are interested down the line of potentially going back to college or higher education of some kind. And we've seen that increase in interest, but it's not necessarily translating to enrollment. And so we want to ensure that we're really focusing on supporting adults in making that decision and identifying barriers that might be in the way to having them enroll and succeed and complete a credential. And lastly, we hope to improve coordination and alignment in education and workforce training to ensure students have portable and stackable options for greater economic mobility. So really what this looks like is there's been so many disruptions in education right now, and we know that we're going to have to adapt in higher education to better serve students in the future and better serve our citizens overall, and thinking about how we do that is going to need to look different than it has in the past. And we need to ensure that students that are going the traditional route in higher education and getting a 4-year, 2-year degree, that has value in the workforce. And also students that are choosing to pursue short-term credentials, as those have gained popularity during this time, both for the convenience and the affordability piece. We need to ensure that those credentials have value both in the workforce and in higher education, and that they're stackable and portable for students. So if a student decides they want to pursue more learning in the future, because that's what we should be all about as a state and as a country, is increased learning, knowledge, and that endless sense of curiosity toward others. So we want to make sure that those credentials that are short-term and workforce credentials have value. And so thinking about those non-degree credentials, how can we define them and have a way to measure them in the future? So that one is a big bucket, that third goal of improving coordination and alignment between workforce and higher education, but it's one that we're having a lot of discussion about and want to specifically call it out and have a pillar here for it. So these are the three things, the three big pillars we're going to be working on in the momentum year, and hoping that we can meet these goals. They're ambitious, but excited to work with partners to reach them and double down on our existing efforts and innovate and think about how we can do things differently going forward, knowing that the world looks different after the pandemic. And since it's come, we've got to think differently. So this time period is here. So we are going to be going all across the state to continue to share this information.
So Sam, I think in light of what you just said about the world is different, the data has changed significantly over the last 2 years. And I think that what we know at our level, at a state level, is that this work happens in local communities. It happens in local schools. It happens when advisors and school counselors and mentors are working one-on-one with students. And to catalyze and kind of talk about and really share this momentum here, we are rolling out a series of 8 regional meetings. They're going to happen in the 8 core regions as designated by the Tennessee Department of Education. We are starting them next Monday in Memphis, and then we'll swing up to UT Martin, and then we'll be at UT Southern. And what we're going to be doing, and here's this, thank you, Sam, these are where we are going to be going over the next 3 weeks. What the purpose of these meetings will be is to both share some picture of what we've shared today about the data, but we're also going to be providing stakeholders who come the individual data for their county, where we can really do a deep dive of what does this look like within your community? What does this look like not only in terms of what has happened in the past, but where we are going? What is the share of an individual community in terms of moving the needle towards, for instance, this goal of 60%? And we're going to share and talk about best practices. What are the challenges? What are the resources that are needed? And what can we do to collectively catalyze this work, both in service of the Drive 55, but also this momentum year work that we're collectively embarking on. So you'll see here the dates and locations of where we are going to be. I believe on the next slide, we have here a little bit later, we will have a QR code where you can register for those. And I believe it's also been dropped into the chat. I'll turn over to you, Sam.
Yes, so I think the way that we're teeing up this framework for communities through these regional meetings are some of the key steps ahead, particularly for our high school students and that goal to reach 60% college going. We know, so the Tennessee Promise deadline for the scholarship, the application deadline is November 1st, so coming right up in the next few weeks. And then we are encouraging students to finish the FAFSA, and we have a whole effort around a campaign to support students to file the FAFSA and complete the FAFSA by March 1st for state aid opportunities. And then college applications, we want to support and shepherd students to apply to college. A lot of times we see that a lot of students, the majority of students apply to Tennessee Promise, but then they don't ultimately apply to a post-secondary institution. And we want to be working together with advising organizations and nonprofit organizations across the state to help students submit their applications to college in the summer and in the spring and summer. And then we know that a lot of students who either apply or have filed the FAFSA, they melt over the summer between high school and enrolling in post-secondary. And we want to ensure that we're staying in close contact with students over the summer months to ensure that we don't see that melt, and we show them the potential and opportunity that college can bring and opportunities post-high school can bring to them. So we're going to be working and doubling down on combating summer melt over this next summer in particular, and then aiming for record-setting college enrollment next fall. So really hoping that we'll see that, and then from there, what is not on here, but what we're going to be doing with the momentum year is all along the way through these key steps is collecting, analyzing, and learning from the work that we do, and together with so many partners, school districts, higher education institutions across the state, to better understand what works, what doesn't work, and where do we need to go next. And so, after all these key steps, and once we reach that momentum year point, a year from now, we will release our findings and put forth a first draft at where do we need to go next? What's the vision for our state for college going, for attainment, knowing that we have an attainment goal right now of 55% post-secondary attainment by 2025, our Drive 55, and that remains a critical roadmap, but we're going to need the next roadmap really soon. So we're hoping we can build this momentum to support students making decisions as they're entering the pipeline for higher education and education and training beyond high school, and hoping that we can propel from this year, this momentum building year, into future opportunities, both for our state and for individuals. And here is the QR code to register for regional meetings. And we're going to continue to put out resources on this website at collegefortennessee.org for the Momentum Year, where we're hoping to share and cast a vision for some communications to students, knowing that we want to all be singing from the same song sheet going forward, and how we support students make choices, because there's a lot of choices right now that students are faced with, and we, as I mentioned before, knowing how students that are coming out of high school right now are so resilient based on the challenges they've had to deal with thus far in their lives, and we want to support them to make the best decisions that are a fit for them in the future.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Sam and Troy. Really appreciate you walking through all that information. I just want to also remind folks, feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat box or into the comment section, the Q&A section. We'll be sure to get to questions before we wrap up here in about 20 minutes. But just to sort of start on some questions and reflections, we've had a number of different folks, organizations, entrepreneurs who have joined us over the last few months on these sessions to talk about the ways in which they and their organizations are trying to respond to the sort of challenges and the decline around the percentages of students who are moving on from high school into post-secondary experience. You know, we obviously know that COVID has had a huge impact on that, but we also know that the decline began before that. And I would be really interested in hearing, Sam and Troy, from your perspective, what do you think are the driving factors or the biggest barriers that students are facing that's resulting in that downward trend on our state's college going rate? And are there any things that seem top of mind for you around how we address those barriers?
Sure. And as we showed and shared, there was a huge catalyst at the start of Tennessee Promise, and we saw a huge jump in our college going rate. And since then, there's been somewhat of a leveling off. But I think the declines that we saw from the pandemic to now, obviously, were due to a lot of the things that have happened during this time period. And there's so much happening. And I think about different barriers that were there, but have been exacerbated during this time period for students. I think particularly we have so many grants and scholarships available to students in our state, but there are other costs. And so we're doing things to mitigate that through completion grants and emergency funds at institutions, but there's more we can do to support students on the affordability front. And I think that we're going to have to adapt and think differently about how both we communicate that to students and how we ensure that they have what they need to focus on what their future looks like and their education.
I think culturally speaking, we have this emerging kind of question about the value proposition of higher education. And I think that we need to really key in on that and think critically about what does college mean in terms of education and training after high school. I think in this state, particularly in a post-promise world, we've always talked about TCATs, 2-year schools, 4-year schools as the kind of full suite. Maybe the suite is expanding even further, but how do we articulate what the value of higher education is and do it in meaningful ways, particularly in light of, at least as of today, an economy that looks very different than it did prior to the pandemic. I think that messaging piece is going to be key going forward.
And then I want to also sort of dig in a little bit more on a specific group of students that you also showed some data on, and I think are certainly top of mind for a lot of partners. You know, we know that not only are these declines more significant for students of color, Black students, Latino students, but something that we've been thinking about a lot on our team recently is the declines that we've seen for male students and specifically male students of color. And I'm wondering, how are you all thinking about the kind of interventions and supports that need to be in place for those students in particular? How are you thinking about having conversations, as an example, at these regional roundtables about the supports that are needed specifically for those students?
Gosh, David, I think step one, right, is understanding that you have a problem, like that there is like a gap. And I think that having the data at a state level, having now for the first time the data at a local high school and community level, I think one of the conversations we want to have at regional meetings is to say, look at your data and look at the trend lines that you see amongst both the whole population, but very specific populations. And, you know, every community has different assets, different challenges. And so I think that there's this work that needs to be done both at a state level and a local community, say what's happening within these given populations and what assets can we come to bear to like turn the needle there. And I think that's what's really going to really move us forward to the place that we want to be. But I think having the data for the first time in this way is a really key first step in understanding what's happening and what we can do about it.
Yeah, you can't improve what you don't measure and what you don't look at it with fidelity. And I think the first steps include supporting more students to file the FAFSA, as that's going to be a leading indicator for college enrollment and can open doors for students, even if they have not made up their minds yet about going to college. And so we plan at THEC in particular with our outreach team to be even more targeted in supporting schools in the state who have had lower FAFSA filing and looking at those numbers across racial lines as well for to improve racial equity and FAFSA filing. And so that's an internal goal we have, but one that we hope to kind of spur some thinking and creative thinking on how we can solve this challenge. And so I do agree that it's the first step is understanding the data. And I do think that there are specific things that we can do along the way to support more students to file the FAFSA and then ultimately enroll.
Troy, I want to build on a comment that you made about sort of expanding the definition also of like what does it mean to go to post-secondary education. And I think one of the things that we say on our SCORE team is that we want all students to pursue some kind of post-high school education, right? Whether that's a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a technical program, or even sort of job embedded training, right? That is providing students with the education needed to be sort of successful in a rapidly changing economy. I'm wondering about how, particularly in this moment where we've seen a decline in the college going rate, there's a question about the value proposition of post-secondary education. How do we better communicate the options that are available to students when they're in high school, as an example? How are you thinking about the sort of kind of the K-12 component of this in terms of how we communicate with students, how we talk to them about the set of options that are available to them, and maybe in some ways even sort of try to redefine what it means when we say we want all students to go to college, and help them understand the set of options that are available to them when they graduate?
This is a great question. And, we know that there's tremendous value in gaining a degree or credential after high school and the doors that it can open for many opportunities, both now and in the future. I think when you're talking to today's students about that, we need to ensure that we are putting the choice and the agency in their hands and thinking about how we can support them to make those decisions. So in a lot of feedback we've gotten and a lot of research that we have dove into, thinking about how we can support students and meet them where they are. So starting with the question of what do you want your life to look like? What do you want to do for a career? And starting from there, instead of saying you have to go to college and then you'll figure it out, it's meeting them where they are in their current thinking and then supporting them to see the menu of options that could be available to them to reach that goal. And so I think it's giving students choice and agency to make those decisions, because we know that, again, there's economic gains that college graduates have. They earn at least 1.5 times more in pay over their lifetime than someone with only a high school diploma. And so I think that beyond economic gain, we know that degree holders on average are more civically engaged, have better health outcomes, and there's so many social determinants. But explaining that to a student, you really have to put the choice in their hands. We don't want to overburden them with information on the economic gains that are immediate and the lifetime earnings.
David, one of the things that you mentioned in your question was redefining what college means. And I think some of that is in this rapidly changing economy and landscape of higher education, defining what a high quality credential is. Not all credentials, not all certificates one may be able to get are created equal. They don't all lead to living wage jobs. And so I think doing the work of kind of like getting our hands around collectively in a very cross-sector way of what the kind of like universe is that we're talking about, and that will help foster alignment in that messaging so that we are kind of all rowing in the same direction. But as the world is changing, I think some defining of what is high quality and is really value add for a student and collecting the data that kind of gives a proof point to that is a really important next step as well.
I want to shift now to talk a bit about FAFSA, and you both have talked about that, how important that is. Could we hear a little bit more about this FAFSA challenge work? What are you doing to get more students to complete the FAFSA? Why does that matter in this broader conversation about college going?
So it matters because, well, it matters less importantly so that this is something Tennessee is really good at, and we want to continue being really good at it. Most importantly, it is the first step to financial aid for a student. It unlocks any number of doors, and if we want to make sure that students have as many options as they possibly can, filling out the FAFSA is an essential first step. And so we have for several years been implementing the Tennessee FAFSA Frenzy. We have, I think, led the country and both our kind of how we've done that, how we've rolled it out in a very aligned way with a lot of partners across the state. We're still leaning into that. Last year, we launched our first Tennessee FAFSA Challenge. We're doing that again this year. We're going to be designating high schools who have either 90% of their Tennessee Promise applicants or a 5% increase year over year as FAFSA champions. We're also going to be recognizing the schools who have the largest increase year over year, both small schools, medium schools, large schools, and then also the schools who have the highest completion rate. And some of the work that Sam mentioned, we have some schools where we've seen some pretty significant disparities, racial disparities, and what can we do? And we've identified those schools. How can we pour resources into those schools? We're doing some partnering to do some survey and community work specifically focused with our students of color of what are the ways that we can talk about FAFSA and build awareness of the value add here. And so I think there's a multi-pronged approach that is most certainly not being done by THEC alone. Good partners like SCORE and Tennessee Achieves, the Department of Ed, the AIRS Foundation are all coming to bear. And it's I think it is like one of the more tactical things we do. We will be meeting on a near weekly basis to look at the data, what's happening across state, and how can we deploy resources in a just-in-time kind of a way so that we're really moving on this metric leading up to the Tennessee Promise deadline of March 1st.
All right, so I have maybe one last question about the work, and then I want to shift to a question about the local meetings across the state. But we've gotten a number of questions from folks who have sent in questions in the comment box here, really diving in a bit more into this connection between K-12 and higher education, and how what's happening in the K-12 experience can better prepare students to make this college going decision. And one person asked about sort of the discovery process that may need to begin in middle school as students are thinking about what their post-high school experiences should look like. We have a post-secondary education leader who asked about ways in which we might better connect credits that students are taking in high school with TCAT opportunities to sort of better strengthen that connection. But I think one question that we got here is, when we say we're talking to students at the end of their K-12 experience, there's a question about whether those students are actually ready for this discussion and ready for this conversation. And I just wonder if you all have any reflections on that. Are there things that are top of mind for you? We talked about advising, obviously, is a critical piece of that, what's happening in the high school experience. But are there other things that you feel like, as an example, the K-12 leaders who are joining us today or listening to this conversation should be thinking about?
I will say hat tip, we hear you, and
Yes.
that is great feedback. I think that I'm so glad that we're here today to also get people thinking about this so that we can continue to get feedback, because I think that's exactly the type of question we're hoping in the spirit of this momentum year to figure out. We've been working in partnership with the State Board of Education of how we create that policy environment in K-12 to support students as early as elementary school and middle school and high school, because we're doing a lot of work, as was noted, on the back end of supporting students really in the junior and senior year to support them, make those decisions. But the question of discovery and what are we doing to scaffold that in the earlier years, there's so much work. It's hard work, but work that we need to do. And I think that there's a lot that we can do better as a state on that front. And so I think that that's why so much of the key messages and how we really think about embedding these conversations in education, and during this time that there's so much disruption and time for innovation, I think we can think differently about how we talk to students earlier and build that in as part of a foundation that students are getting all along.
And Sam, I'm assuming that you're hoping that K-12 leaders, community leaders, would participate in these community conversations as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great. Awesome. All right. And then last question really to that point, and then we're going to wrap up is we have one person who asked about what kind of data should they expect to see at these conversations? Will THEC be sharing sort of local data in each of these conversations so that partners know specifically what the data looks like for their own community?
Sure. So on THEC's website, we currently have the statewide report. We also have high school level data that you can dive in and pull the data for individual high schools. What we will be giving at the regional meetings will be a county look, and we will be providing information across demographic groups. We will also have it for the last 5 years, so you'll be able to see a trend line. And so it'll be a highly localized set of data that we will be providing alongside the statewide picture, so folks can kind of see where they are in comparison to the state as a whole.
And on that, we're doing these regional meetings after we've launched this momentum year, or shortly after, to really jumpstart it. And so we're hoping to get feedback on what other data would be helpful to see. And you know, I think that there could be things we could turn around for communities, but also things that we can put on our list of things to improve upon. And so we're hoping to get good feedback on that. But as Troy mentioned, we're going to have hopefully some easily digestible information to give to communities at the county level.
Great. All right, we're going to turn to our last question. This is a question that we ask our guests every time we host one of these sessions. And it's really a question that tries to get us to zoom out a little bit and think about what we want for an education system and an educational experience for students. So if you're to think ahead 20 years from now, what are your hopes for what education in Tennessee looks like, whether it's related to post-secondary education or not? What do you hope for? What do you aspire for? What do you think will be true? What do you hope to be true 20 years from now as we think about where we're going in education in Tennessee? Maybe Troy, if you want to start, and then Sam, you can wrap up.
Sure. So I have two responses to that, and one is related to something that you asked us a minute ago. I hope that in that time period, we can start thinking about the competencies that make a student successful and prepared for career in college in the same way that we talk about competencies in math and literacy, and that we stack them vertically, and we know what are the things that we want a third grader to know or a seventh grader, and we know who is going to be responsible for leading into that competency by grade level as it relates to career in college. I think that is the answer to part of your question about starting earlier, is what do they need to know and who's going to be responsible for making sure they know it. The other piece is I think that this idea of defining what higher education is, and so we really understand kind of the landscape that we're talking about, how stackable credentials work, and how coming in and out of the system makes sense for the lives of the folks that we're serving. I hope by that time we have a really clear kind of picture of how folks at a variety of different places in their life can engage and better themselves through higher education, so that they can change their family tree, just like we know higher education does.
Beautifully said, Troy. And to build on that, I started my career as a kindergarten teacher, so I love this question, thinking about the full spectrum now as someone who thinks about higher education policy and workforce development. And I think my hope is that in our country, in our state, we really need a new definition of higher education excellence. So one that really measures what colleges and universities can do for their communities and how they increase economic mobility of citizens, of students, and their graduates. And because our campuses, our colleges, our universities play such a vital role in their communities to ensure learning and earning are aligned. And really, I've always believed that higher education should be a public good, and higher education has tremendous power to influence and improve communities, both at an economic development level and the lives of individuals. So my hope is that higher education excellence, how we measure it, how we really raise it up, is changed for the better to show how higher education and higher ed overall is serving as an economic engine, both for cities, towns, communities, our country, and also for the individual level for economic and social mobility. And really, there's such a stake in our democratic values overall, and how citizens flourish through higher ed and education overall. And I just think there's a lot over the next 20 years that we really have to be, we can't be exclusive of our community. We have to ensure that we're working in tandem with what the needs are of the public.
Well said, Sam. Thank you for those thoughts. So I know we've said we're going to keep these sessions only 45 minutes or so, so we're going to respect everyone's time on a busy Friday morning. But thank you again to Sam and to Troy for being with us, for sharing the exciting work you're doing, the work that's to come with these community conversations across our state. Really looking forward to the statewide tour, the many partners I know who will be coming together to help ensure that more high school graduates are pursuing some form of education after high school, and really those local conversations about what that looks like in communities across the state. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you for a great discussion. Hope you have a great day, a great weekend, and look forward to seeing you again soon.